Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. The rain was coming down in sheets that Tuesday, the kind that makes the world outside your window look like a watercolor painting left out in a storm. I was nursing a cup of lukewarm tea, staring at the rivulets chasing each other down the glass, and thinking about absolutely nothing of consequence. That's how it is sometimes, isn't it? Life just hums along, a predictable tune, and then someone throws a cymbal crash into the orchestra. For me, that cymbal crash was named David. David is my husband Mark's younger brother. Not by much, just a couple of years, but they're night and day, those two. Mark, bless his heart, is steady as a rock, predictable, comfortable. He's a good man, a kind man. We've been married for 22 years, and it's been a good life, a calm sea mostly. David, though, he's always been the wild card, the one with the restless energy, the one who'd show up at Thanksgiving with a new girlfriend and a story about almost striking it rich in some venture or another. He's charming. I'll give him that, with a smile that could melt glaciers and eyes that always seem to be seeing something just beyond your shoulder, something more exciting. I hadn't seen David in, maybe 6 months. He'd been out west, as he vaguely put it, chasing some tech dream. Mark worried, of course, in his quiet way. I worried too, a little. David had a knack for finding trouble, or rather, for trouble finding him. So when the doorbell rang that afternoon, cutting through the drumming of the rain, the last person I expected to see on my doorstep was David, looking like he'd wrestled a storm and lost. He was drenched, his dark hair plastered to his forehead, his usually expensive-looking leather jacket stained and darkened by the rain. But it wasn't his disheveled appearance that struck me. It was the look in his eyes. That usual spark, that restless gleam, it was gone. Replaced by something haunted. "Luna," he said, his voice raspy. "Can I come in?" "David, good heavens, get in here before you drown." I pulled him into the warmth of the hallway, grabbing a towel from the linen closet. "What on earth are you doing here? Does Mark know you're in town?" He took the towel, dabbing at his face, but his eyes didn't meet mine. No, Mark doesn't know. I needed to talk to you, Luna. Alone." That set off a little warning bell in my head. David and I had always been friendly, in that way you are with your in-laws. We'd shared laughs at family dinners, polite conversations, but never anything deep, never anything that required a secret meeting on a rainy Tuesday. I led him into the living room. The house felt unusually quiet. Mark was at his firm, wouldn't be home for hours. The kids, well, they're grown and flown, carving out their own lives. It was just me, the rain, and a very troubled-looking David. He sat on the edge of the sofa, the one Mark and I usually curled up on to watch old movies. He looked out of place there, too tense, too wired. He ran a hand through his damp hair, and then he just stared at the floor for a long moment. The silence stretched, filled only by the relentless drumming of the rain on the roof and the occasional sigh of the old house settling around us. I sat in the armchair opposite him, trying to project an air of calm I didn't entirely feel. "David, what is it? You look like you've seen a ghost." He finally lifted his head, and his eyes, when they met mine, were filled with a kind of desperate intensity that made me lean back slightly. "Luna," he began, his voice low, almost a whisper. "I'm in trouble. Real trouble." I nodded slowly. "Okay, what kind of trouble?" I was thinking debts, a business deal gone sour, the usual David escapades. I was bracing myself to offer him a loan, maybe call Mark to see if he could pull some strings. He shook his head. "It's complicated." He paused, then seemed to make a decision. He reached into the inside pocket of his ruined jacket and pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope. It looked expensive, official, not like something you'd carry around in a downpour. He placed it on the coffee table between us. It landed with a soft thud that seemed to echo in the quiet room. "I need your help, Luna," he said, his gaze unwavering now, and there was something in it, a raw vulnerability I'd never seen in him before. It was unnerving. "My help? David, if it's money, Mark, and I can—" He cut me off, a sharp, almost pained gesture. "It's not just money. Or it is, but not in the way you think." He took a deep breath, the kind you take before you dive into icy water. "Luna, I need you to do something for me. Something unconventional." My heart started to beat a little faster. Unconventional. What did that mean? I glanced at the envelope, then back at his strained face. The air in the room felt suddenly charged, thick with unspoken words. "What do you mean, David?" I asked, my voice a little breathless. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. He looked older than his 38 years right then, the lines around his eyes deeper, his mouth set in a grim line. "Luna," he said, his voice cracking slightly, "I'm going to ask you something outrageous, something that you have every right to be angry about, to throw me out of your house for. But I need you to hear me out. Please." I just nodded, my throat suddenly dry. The rain seemed to intensify outside, a frantic, almost violent soundtrack to the scene unfolding in my living room. He licked his lips, his eyes darting around the room as if looking for an escape, then settling back on me with that same desperate intensity. "There's $100,000 in that envelope, Luna. Cash." My eyes widened. $100,000? What on earth had he gotten himself into? "David, what?" He held up a hand, stopping me. "Please, just let me get this out." He took another shaky breath. "It's yours, Luna. All of it. If you'll spend one night with me." The words hung in the air, heavy, unbelievable. My mind reeled. One night? With David? My husband's brother? For money? It was like a scene from a bad movie, something sordid and cheap. A wave of confusion, shock, and a strange, unexpected flicker of something I couldn't quite name washed over me. I stared at him, speechless, the rain pounding against the windows like 1,000 accusing fists. My quiet Tuesday afternoon had just exploded. I must have looked as stunned as I felt, because David rushed on, his words tumbling out in a torrent. "Not like that, Luna. Please, don't misunderstand. It's not what you think. Or maybe it is. I don't know. I'm not explaining this right." He buried his face in his hands for a moment, a groan escaping him. "God, this is a disaster." I finally found my voice, though it was weak, shaky. "David, what are you saying? You're offering me $100,000 to sleep with you?" The words tasted like ash in my mouth. This was David, Mark's brother. The man who'd played with my kids when they were little, who teased me good-naturedly at countless family barbecues. It was unthinkable. He looked up, his face pale, his eyes pleading. "No, yes. I mean, technically, yes, that's the offer. But the reason is what matters. It's not about sex, not in the way it sounds. I swear, Luna, it's about something else, something I can't achieve any other way." I stood up then, a cold anger starting to "Next week?" I echoed, incredulous. "David, that's impossible." "Tell me about it," he said, a humorless laugh escaping him. She set a deadline. A dinner with the estate lawyer? A kind of inspection, I guess. He needs to see that I'm not the same reckless fool I've always been. He needs to see that I'm settled. That someone respectable, someone like you, Luna, would choose to be with me. A cold dread was beginning to seep into me. And you think offering me money to pretend to be with you for a night will satisfy that? Not just pretend, Luna. That's the thing. He leaned forward again, his eyes locking onto mine. The lawyer, Mr. Abernethy, he's no fool. He's known the family for generations. He knew Mildred's intentions. She wanted to see me happy, settled with someone genuine. A photograph, a quick introduction. It won't be enough. He needs to believe it's real. We'd have to attend this dinner together. We'd have to be convincing. Convincing, I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. David, Mark is your brother, my husband. I know, Luna, I know. His voice rose, edged with desperation. Believe me, if there was any other way, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be putting you in this insane position. But I'm desperate. This isn't just about the money for me, though God knows I need it. There are other things. Debts I have to clear, people I owe. Bad people, Luna. If I don't get this inheritance, I'm in serious danger. The haunted look in his eyes suddenly made a terrifying kind of sense. This wasn't just David being irresponsible. This was David in fear of his life. My anger began to morph into a confusing mix of fear for him and a profound sense of unease about what he was asking. So the $100,000, I said slowly, trying to piece it together. It's for me too. Act as your loving partner for an evening? To fool a lawyer? Yes, but it's more than acting, Luna. That's why I came to you. He paused, and his next words surprised me even more than the initial offer. I've always admired you, Luna. You're kind, you're intelligent, you're graceful. You're everything I'm not. And you're the only person I know who could possibly pull this off, who could make it believable. Because with you, I think, for one evening, I could almost believe it myself, that I could be the kind of man someone like you would be with. His confession hung in the air, raw and unexpected. It wasn't a declaration of love, not in a romantic sense, but it was something far more vulnerable. It was an admission of his own perceived failings and a strange, desperate kind of compliment. I stared at him, my mind racing. This was insane. Utterly, completely insane. And yet, the fear in his eyes, the genuine desperation in his voice, it felt real. He wasn't just trying to con his way into an inheritance. He was running scared. Why me, David? Why not hire an actress? Someone who does this for a living? He shook his head. Abernethy would see right through it. He's looking for genuine connection, or at least the convincing appearance of it. And I trust you, Luna. As much as I'm terrified of what you must think of me right now, I trust you. I know you wouldn't exploit this. And I know that if anyone can understand, or at least try to, it's you. The rain had stopped. A watery sunlight was beginning to filter through the clouds, painting stripes across the living room floor. The world outside was suddenly quiet, peaceful, a stark contrast to the turmoil inside me. To spend a night with my husband's brother. Not in the way the crude offer initially implied, but in a charade, a performance to save him. A performance that, according to him, required a level of authenticity that an actress couldn't provide. It was still a monumental request, a betrayal of Mark's trust in a way, even if no lines were physically crossed. But then I looked at David's face, truly looked. The charm was stripped away, the bravado gone. What remained was a frightened man, grasping at straws. And he was family. Flawed, reckless, exasperating family, but family nonetheless. "This dinner with the lawyer," I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. "When is it?" "Next Tuesday," he said, his eyes wide with a dawning, hesitant hope. "1 week from today. It's at a very formal restaurant downtown. Abernathy expects. Well, he expects to see a couple. A couple. For 1 night. For $100,000. For David's safety." The implications were dizzying. What would Mark say? How could I even begin to explain this to him? Or would David expect me to keep this a secret from my own husband? And Mark? I asked, the question hanging heavy between us. What about Mark? David looked down at his hands. That's the hardest part, Luna. Ideally, for this to be convincing, for Abernathy not to suspect. Mark shouldn't know. Not until it's over. I know that's an impossible thing to ask. A terrible thing. An impossible, terrible thing. He was right. To deceive Mark, even with the intention of helping his brother, felt like a betrayal of everything our marriage stood for. And yet, the image of David, truly afraid, hounded by dangerous people, it was a powerful motivator. I need to thank David, I said, standing up again, my legs feeling a little unsteady. This is a lot to process. More than a lot. He nodded quickly, his eyes full of a fragile hope. Of course, Luna. Take all the time you need. I'll find a hotel. I can call you tomorrow? He looked towards the envelope on the coffee table. The money, it's there, untouched. You don't have to decide now about that part. Just think about the dinner. Think about helping me. I walked him to the door. The air outside was fresh, washed clean by the rain. The sun was struggling to break through the clouds fully, but there was a sense of calm after the storm. A deceptive calm, perhaps, given the tempest that had just been unleashed in my quiet life. As he stepped out onto the porch, he turned back, his face etched with anxiety. Luna, whatever you decide, thank you for listening. It means more than you know. I just nodded, unable to find any words. I watched him walk down the path, his shoulders slumped, a man carrying a weight far too heavy for him. He didn't look back. I closed the door and leaned against it, my heart pounding in my chest. The envelope still sat on the coffee table, a silent, potent symbol of the extraordinary situation I found myself in. $100,000. A night with my husband's brother. A desperate plea for help. My mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions, shock, anger, pity, and a strange, unsettling sense of responsibility. What was I going to do? And what on earth would happen next? The rest of that day passed in a blur. I tried to go about my usual routine, tidying the kitchen, answering a few emails, planning dinner, but my mind was elsewhere, replaying David's visit, his desperate words, the look in his eyes. The envelope sat on the coffee table, a heavy presence in the room. I hadn't touched it. I couldn't bring myself to. It felt like a dangerous object, capable of changing everything. When Mark came home that evening, he found me quieter than usual. He asked if I was all right, and I mumbled something about the gloomy weather getting me down. I hated lying to him, even by omission. We'd built our life on honesty, on open communication. This secret, this monumental dilemma David had dropped in my lap, felt like a crack forming in that foundation. Anything interesting happened today? He asked over dinner, his voice casual, unsuspecting. I'd nearly choked on my pasta. No, not really, I managed, trying to keep my voice light. Just the usual. The highlight was the mailman finally bringing that package I was waiting for. A small, inconsequential lie to cover a much larger, more complicated truth. I felt a pang of guilt, sharp and uncomfortable. That night, I lay in bed beside Mark, listening to his steady breathing, and felt a chasm opening between us. He was right there, solid and familiar, yet I felt miles away, lost in a sea of anxiety and indecision. David's words echoed in my head. Mark shouldn't know. Not until it's over. How could I possibly agree to such a thing? Deceive the man I loved, the man I had built a life with. And yet, the fear in David's eyes haunted me. Bad people, Luna. What did that mean? How serious was the danger he was in? He'd always been prone to exaggeration, to dramatic pronouncements, but this felt different. This felt raw, real. The next morning, I woke with a heavy sense of dread. I still hadn't touched the envelope. I avoided the living room as much as possible, as if its mere presence was a reproach. I knew I had to make a decision, and soon David would be calling. He called around 10. His voice was tentative, hopeful. Luna, did you have a chance to think? I took a deep breath. David, I need to understand more. This dinner, what exactly would it entail? What would be expected of me? It's at Le Claremont, he said, naming one of the most exclusive old-money restaurants in the city. Very formal. Abernathy is traditional. He'll be looking for us to act like a couple. Affectionate, but appropriately so. Holding hands, perhaps. Shared glances. Easy conversation that implies a history, a connection. A history we don't have, I pointed out, my voice flat. I know. That's the part we'd have to create. Or at least allude to. We could say we reconnected recently. That we've been keeping it quiet because of the family connection, wanted to be sure before we told anyone, especially Mark. He sounded like he'd rehearsed this. And the money, David? I asked, the words still feeling foreign and distasteful. You're serious about that? $100,000 for an evening's performance? There was a pause. Luna, he said, his voice softer now, more earnest. The money isn't a payment. Not really. It's a way for me to show you how much this means to me, how desperate I am. And frankly, it's a way to make this worth your while, to compensate you for the enormous risk, the awkwardness, the compromise I'm asking you to make. You can do whatever you want with it. Donate it to charity. Burn it. I don't care. But I want you to have it, to know that I understand the magnitude of what I'm asking. His words, surprisingly, didn't make it feel any better. They just highlighted the transactional nature of it, no matter how he tried to frame it. But they also underscored his desperation. David, I said slowly, if I were to even consider this, and that's a huge if, there's one thing that's non-negotiable. Mark, I can't lie to him. I won't. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear him wrestling with that. Finally, he sighed. Luna, if Mark knows, and he's upset or doesn't approve, Abernathy might pick up on it. If Mark is there, or if there's any tension. I'm not saying Mark has to be there, I interjected. But he has to know. I have to be able to tell him what I'm doing, and why. If he doesn't agree, if he asks me not to do it, then I can't. My marriage comes first, David. Always. Another silence. Then, I understand. I respect that, Luna. Of course I do. He sounded dejected. But it makes it much harder, much riskier. It's the only way I would even contemplate this, I stated firmly. And even then, David, I don't know. This whole thing feels wrong on so many levels. I know it does, he said quietly. But what's the alternative? If I don't get this inheritance, Luna, these people I owe, they're not going to just forget about it. They're serious. This isn't some gambling debt I can talk my way out of. The fear was back in his voice, palpable even over the phone. It twisted something inside me. I thought of Mark, how devastated he would be if something happened to his brother, despite all their differences, despite all of David's recklessness. There was a bond there, familial and deep. Let me talk to Mark, I said, finally, the decision forming even as I spoke the words. I'll explain everything to him. And then we'll see. I can't promise anything, David. That's more than I could have hoped for, Luna. Thank you. His relief was evident. When will you talk to him? Tonight, I said. I'll call you tomorrow morning and let you know what we've decided. We said goodbye, and I hung up the phone, my hand trembling slightly. Now came the hardest part, telling Mark. How on earth was I going to explain to my steady, honorable husband that his own brother had offered me $100,000 to pose as his partner for an evening, and that I was actually considering it? The thought of that conversation filled me with a profound anxiety. I spent the rest of the day rehearsing it in my mind, trying out different ways to phrase it, to soften the blow. But there was no easy way to say it. It was outrageous. It was fraught with peril for my marriage, for our family. That evening, when Mark came home, I waited until after dinner. We were sitting in the living room, the television off, a rare moment of quiet companionship. The envelope from David was still on the coffee table. I deliberately left it there. It was time for it to be seen, to be acknowledged. Mark noticed me looking at it. "What's that?" he asked, his brow furrowing slightly. I took a deep breath. "Mark, we need to talk. Something serious has happened." He looked at me, his expression immediately concerned. "What is it, Luna? Are you okay?" "I'm okay," I said. "But it's about David." Mark's face tensed. "David? What's he done now?" There was a familiar weariness in his voice when he spoke of his brother's escapades, and so I told him. Everything. About David showing up in the rain, his fear, the story about Great Aunt Mildred's will, the impossible conditions, the dangerous people he owed money to. And then the hardest part, the offer. The $100,000. The request for me to pose as his partner for one night. As I spoke, I watched Mark's face. It went through a range of emotions. Disbelief, confusion, a flicker of something that looked like anger. And then, as I explained David's fear, a deep, worried frown. He was silent for a long time after I finished, just staring at the envelope on the table. The grandfather clock in the hall ticked loudly, each tick seeming to amplify the tension in the room. Finally, he looked at me, his eyes searching mine. "He offered you $100,000? His voice was incredulous. I nodded, my stomach churning. "It's in the envelope." He reached out slowly and picked it up. It was thick, heavy. He didn't open it. He just held it, weighing it in his hand, as if weighing the gravity of the situation. "And he wants you to pretend to be his girlfriend, to fool this lawyer?" "Essentially, yes," I said. "To attend a dinner with him. To act as if we're in a committed relationship." Mark stood up and walked to the window, looking out into the darkness. His back was to me, and I couldn't read his expression. The silence stretched again, taut and uncomfortable. I held my breath, waiting for his reaction. Would he be furious? Disgusted? Would he forbid me from even considering it? When he finally turned back, his face was troubled, but not angry, not in the way I had expected. "He's really scared, isn't he?" he said, his voice quiet. I nodded. "Yes, Mark. I think he genuinely is. I've never seen him like that before." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of stress I knew well. "That idiot. That damn fool. What has he gotten himself into this time?" It was more a lament than a question. He sighed, a deep, weary sound. "Great Aunt Mildred. Of course. She always did like her drama." He looked at me then, a long, searching look. "And you, Luna? What do you think about all this? He asked you to keep it from me." I told him I wouldn't, I said immediately. I told him I would have to tell you, and that if you weren't okay with it, I wouldn't do it. Our marriage, our trust, that comes first. Always. A flicker of relief crossed his face. He came back and sat beside me on the sofa, taking my hand. His touch was warm, reassuring. "Thank you for that, Luna. For your honesty." "So, what do we do?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. It's insane, I know, but if he's really in danger... Mark was silent for another moment, his thumb tracing patterns on the back of my hand. $100,000, he mused, a strange expression on his face. He must be truly desperate to offer that. And to ask you, his brother's wife. He shook his head slowly. "It's the most preposterous thing I've ever heard. I know. But," he continued, his voice thoughtful, "if David is truly in danger, if this inheritance is the only way out for him, as much as he drives me crazy, he's my brother. I can't just let something terrible happen to him if there's a way to prevent it." My heart gave a little leap of hope, or perhaps it was apprehension. I wasn't sure. "So, you're saying, you'd be okay with me doing this?" I asked, hardly daring to believe it. Mark looked at me, his gaze serious. "Okay is not the word I'd use, Luna. The thought of you with David pretending to be a couple? It's unsettling. Deeply unsettling. I trust you, Luna. You know I do. Implicitly. But this is a strange situation." "I know," I whispered. He took a deep breath. "But I also know you. I know your heart. And I know you wouldn't consider this if you didn't think David was genuinely in trouble. And if this is the only way to help him..." He paused, then made a decision. "All right. If you think you can do this, if you're willing to, then yes, I'll support you." A wave of relief washed over me, so strong it almost made me dizzy. But it was quickly followed by a fresh wave of anxiety. Now the decision was truly mine. Mark was leaving it up to me. "There are conditions, though," he said, his voice firm. "Okay," I agreed. "First, that money." He gestured towards the envelope. "We don't touch it. Not a penny. If you do this, you're doing it to help David, not for financial gain. Afterwards, he can have it back or donate it, whatever. But it doesn't come to us." I nodded. "I agree. I never wanted the money anyway. Second," he continued, "I want to know everything. Every detail about this dinner, about what's expected of you. And if at any point you feel uncomfortable, truly uncomfortable or unsafe, you walk away. No questions asked. David will just have to deal with the consequences. Agreed, I said, my voice a little stronger now. His support, his trust, it was like a bedrock beneath me. And third, he said, his eyes softening as he looked at me, you and I, we need to be rock solid through this. No secrets, no misunderstandings. We talk about everything. This is testing us, Luna. We need to make sure we pass that test. Tears welled up in my eyes. Thank you, Mark, I whispered, leaning my head against his shoulder. Thank you for trusting me, for understanding. He put his arm around me, holding me close. David owes us. Big time. He managed a small, wry smile. And you, my dear Luna, you are one remarkable woman. The next morning I called David. Mark knows, I told him. And he's agreed. Reluctantly, under certain conditions. I could hear the astonishment in David's voice. He did? Wow. Luna, I don't know what to say. Thank you. And thank Mark for me. I owe you both more than I can ever repay. Yes, you do, I said, a hint of firmness in my tone. Now about this dinner. We need to plan this, David, meticulously. If I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it right, and I need your absolute assurance that this is just an act. One evening, for the sake of this inheritance and your safety. Nothing more. Absolutely, Luna, he said, his voice earnest. My word of honor. You have my solemn promise. And so it was decided. I, Luna, respectable wife and mother, was about to step into the most bizarre role of my life. A temporary make-believe girlfriend to my reckless, charming, and deeply troubled brother-in-law. All to convince a shrewd lawyer that our fabricated relationship was real, and in doing so, save David from some unnamed, unseen danger. The week leading up to that Tuesday night dinner felt like a strange dream, a period of intense preparation and underlying anxiety. The $100,000 remained in its envelope, locked away in Mark's study safe, a silent reminder of the absurdity and the stakes of the situation. David and I met a couple of times, discreetly, in quiet coffee shops on the other side of town. Mark knew about these meetings, of course. He was stoic, supportive, but I could see the worry etched in the lines around his eyes. Each time I left to meet David, Mark would just kiss me and say, "Be careful," and call me if you need anything. His trust was a heavy cloak, one I was determined not to soil. During those meetings, David and I tried to construct a plausible backstory. We decided we'd reconnected at a mutual friend's art gallery opening about 3 months prior. It sounded sophisticated, plausible. David, for all his faults, did know a lot about art. We concocted a few shared anecdotes, little stories we could drop into the conversation with Mr. Abernathy, details that would lend an air of authenticity to our tirade. David coached me on his great-aunt Mildred, her quirks, her passions, the family history she held so dear. He told me about Mr. Abernathy, the estate lawyer. Old school, perceptive, a man who valued decorum and sincerity above all else. He'll be looking for genuine affection, Luna, David said, his brow furrowed with worry. Not over the top, but real. A shared glance, a light touch of the hand, easy laughter. It felt like rehearsing for a play, a very high-stakes play where the script was only partially written and so much depended on improvisation and genuine seeming emotion. I found myself observing couples more closely, how they interacted, the subtle cues of intimacy, the comfortable silences. It was a strange exercise in emotional mimicry. David, to his credit, was mostly respectful during these planning sessions. There were moments, though, when I'd catch him looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. It wasn't overtly romantic, but it was intense. A kind of wistful admiration, perhaps. Or maybe just the desperation of a drowning man clinging to a life raft. I tried to ignore it, to keep our interactions strictly businesslike, focused on the task at hand. The hardest part was practicing the physical closeness. "You might need to take my arm when we walk in," he'd say, his voice carefully neutral. Or, "Abernathy might expect us too, sit close at the table." Each suggestion made my skin prickle with a strange mix of awkwardness and a reluctant understanding of the necessity. We practiced a few chaste handholds, brief and clumsy, both of us acutely aware of the artificiality, the underlying tension. One afternoon, as we sat in a bustling cafe, the aroma of coffee and pastries thick in the air, David suddenly reached across the small table and gently took my hand. His was warm, surprisingly steady. "Luna," he said, his voice low, "I just want to say again, thank you. You have no idea what this means. You're saving my life in more ways than one." His sincerity was disarming. I looked into his eyes, the same eyes that could be so full of roguish charm, but now they held a genuine vulnerability, a deep gratitude. For a fleeting moment, the awkwardness vanished, and I saw him not as Mark's reckless brother, or the man who had made an outrageous proposition, but simply as a human being in trouble, reaching out for help. "Let's just get through this dinner, David," I said softly, gently withdrawing my hand after a moment. "Let's focus on making it believable." The day of the dinner arrived cloaked in a cool, crisp autumn evening. The kind where the air feels electric with possibility, or in my case, with an almost unbearable nervousness. I spent the afternoon in a state of suspended animation, unable to concentrate on anything. Mark had taken the day off work, a quiet show of support. He didn't hover, didn't fuss, but his presence was a comfort. I had bought a new dress for the occasion, a simple, elegant sapphire blue sheath that I hoped projected an air of quiet sophistication. Nothing too flashy, nothing that screamed, "Look at me." When I came downstairs, ready to leave, Mark was waiting in the living room. He looked at me, a long, appraising gaze, and a slow smile spread across his face. "You look beautiful, Luna," he said, his voice full of warmth. He came over and took my hands. "You're going to be amazing." "I'm terrified," I confessed, my voice trembling slightly. "I know, but you're also the strongest, most capable woman I know." He squeezed my hands. "Remember what we talked about. If it gets to be too much, you call me. I'll be there in 10 minutes, Abernathy or no Abernathy." His unwavering support was my anchor. I took a deep breath. "Okay, let's do this." David was picking me up. The plan was for us to arrive at La Clermont together, as any couple would. When his car, a sleek, dark sedan I didn't recognize, probably rented, I thought, pulled up to the curb, my heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Mark walked me to the door. "Good luck," he whispered, giving me a quick, reassuring kiss. "I love you." "I love you too," I whispered back, clinging to his words like a talisman. David got out of the car and opened the passenger door for me. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored dark suit, a crisp white shirt, and a silk tie. He looked every inch the successful, respectable man Great-Aunt Mildred had presumably hoped he would become, except for the shadows under his eyes, the subtle tension around his mouth. "You look stunning, Luna," he said, his voice a little husky. "Thank you, David. You clean up pretty well yourself," I replied, trying for a lightness I didn't feel. The drive to the restaurant was mostly silent, David seemed as tense as I was, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. We exchanged a few stilted pleasantries, but the air in the car was thick with unspoken anxieties. The Claremont was even more opulent than I had imagined. Crystal chandeliers glittered, waiters in starched tuxedos moved with silent efficiency, and the low hum of conversation from beautifully dressed patrons filled the air. It was a world away from my comfortable, unpretentious life with Mark. As we approached the entrance, David hesitated for a fraction of a second, then offered me his arm. "Ready?" he murmured, his eyes searching mine. I took a deep breath and slipped my hand into the crook of his arm. His arm was warm, solid. "As I'll ever be," I replied, forcing a smile. We stepped inside, and for a moment, I felt like an actress stepping onto a stage, the spotlight blinding, the audience invisible but judging. David gave his name to the maitre d', who led us through the opulent dining room to a discreet table in a quiet alcove. A distinguished-looking older gentleman with silver hair and kind, intelligent eyes rose as we approached. This had to be Mr. Abernathy. "David, my boy," Mr. Abernathy said, his voice warm and cultured. He extended a hand to David, then turned his keen gaze on me. "And this must be the lovely Luna. David has told me so much about you." David made the introductions, his voice smoother and more confident than I expected. "Mr. Abernathy, this is Luna. Luna, this is Mr. Alistair Abernathy, a very old friend of my family." I offered my hand, hoping it wasn't trembling too noticeably. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Abernathy." "The pleasure is all mine, my dear," he said, his eyes twinkling as he held my hand for a moment longer than necessary, a polite but assessing gaze. "Please, sit." The dinner began, and so did our performance. David, to my surprise, was brilliant. He was charming, attentive, deferential to Mr. Abernathy, and surprisingly tender towards me. He'd occasionally reach for my hand across the table, his touch light but reassuring. He'd catch my eye and smile, a small, intimate smile that, if I didn't know better, I would have sworn was genuine. He spoke of our shared interests, referencing the fictional art gallery opening, a concert we'd supposedly attended, a book we'd both enjoyed. He wove a narrative of a new, blossoming romance with an ease that both impressed and unsettled me. I played my part as best I could, smiling, nodding, adding a comment here and there, trying to mirror his affectionate cues. I spoke of David's kindness, his newly discovered, apparently, thoughtful nature. It felt surreal, like I was watching myself from a distance. Mr. Abernathy listened, asked gentle questions, his gaze missing nothing. He was a shrewd observer, his kindly demeanor belying a sharp intellect. There were moments of sheer panic, like when Abernathy asked me how Mark felt about my new relationship with his brother. David jumped in smoothly, explaining that we were taking things slowly, respecting Mark's need to adjust, but that Mark, being the good man he was, ultimately wanted happiness for both his brother and for me. It was a masterful save, but I felt a hot flush of guilt at the deception involving Mark, even though he knew. The food was exquisite, though I barely tasted it. The conversation flowed, ranging from Great-Aunt Mildred's eccentricities. Abernathy shared a few amusing anecdotes of his own, to David's supposed plans for the future. Plans that now included stability, responsibility, and a settled life, presumably with me by his side. At one point, David casually draped his arm over the back of my chair. The gesture was so natural, so proprietorial, that it sent a jolt through me. I leaned into it slightly, as I imagined a woman in love might do, fighting the urge to stiffen. I could feel the warmth of his hand near my shoulder, a constant reminder of the charade we were enacting. The most challenging moment came when Mr. Abernathy looked directly at me, his expression kind but searching. "Luna, my dear," he said, his voice gentle. Mildred's greatest wish for David was that he find genuine happiness, a true partnership. She was a romantic at heart, despite her prickly exterior. "What is it about David that has captured your heart?" The question hung in the air. My mind went blank. This wasn't something we had rehearsed. I looked at David, a flicker of panic in my eyes. He gave me a tiny, almost imperceptible nod of encouragement. I turned back to Mr. Abernathy, buying myself a few seconds by taking a sip of water. What could I say that would sound genuine, that would satisfy this discerning old man? I thought of the David I had seen in the past week, the frightened, desperate man, yes, but also the one who had shown glimpses of vulnerability, of a longing for something more. David. David has a capacity for passion that's quite extraordinary. I began slowly, choosing my words carefully. A passion for life, for new ideas, and beneath the adventurous spirit, I smiled, a small, knowing smile. There's a surprising depth of loyalty and a real desire for connection. He sees the world in a unique way, and he's teaching me to see it differently too. He makes me feel hopeful. As I spoke, I glanced at David. His eyes were fixed on me, and there was an expression in them I had never seen before. It was a look of profound surprise, and something else, something that looked almost like tenderness, or perhaps it was just gratitude. For a moment, the restaurant, Mr. Abernathy, the inheritance, it all faded away, and there was just that look passing between us. It was unnervingly real. Mr. Abernathy smiled, a genuine, warm smile this time. A beautiful sentiment, my dear, beautifully expressed. He raised his wine glass. To David and Luna, may your future be as bright as your connection seems to be. We clinked glasses, the sound delicate in the hushed atmosphere. David's hand found mine under the table, his fingers lacing through mine. This time I didn't pull away. His touch felt different, less like a part of the act and more like a silent acknowledgement of the emotional tightrope we were walking together. The rest of the dinner passed more easily after that. The tension seemed to ebb away, replaced by a strange sort of camaraderie. We were a team, David and I, pulling off an elaborate deception, and for those few hours we were bound by that shared secret, that shared goal. As the evening drew to a close, Mr. Abernathy seemed satisfied. He wished us both well, and as he shook David's hand, he said, "Your great-aunt would be pleased, David." Very pleased indeed. There was a finality in his tone, a sense of approval that made David visibly relax. Walking out of the restaurant, back into the cool night air, I felt a wave of exhaustion wash over me. The performance was over. We had done it. David's arm was still around my waist, a lingering echo of our charade, and for a moment neither of us moved to break the contact. "You were incredible, Luna," he said, his voice low, almost awestruck, as we stood by his car. "Thank you. I mean it. You saved me tonight." "We did it, David," I said, a weary smile touching my lips. "Now, let's just hope it was enough." He opened the car door for me, and as I slid into the seat, I felt a profound sense of relief, but also a strange, lingering unease. The night had been a success, it seemed. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, something intangible, in the opulent dining room of Le Clermont, under the watchful eyes of Mr. Abernathy. The lines between pretense and reality had blurred, just for a moment, and I wasn't entirely sure what to make of it. The drive back to my house was quieter than the one to the restaurant, but it was a different kind of silence. Not the tense, anxious silence of before, but something more reflective, almost comfortable. The shared experience, the successful navigation of a high wire act, had forged an odd temporary bond between us. David pulled up to my curb. The porch light was on, a welcoming beacon in the darkness. I knew Mark would be waiting up. "Well," I said, turning to David, "I hope this works out for you, for your sake." He didn't immediately respond. He just looked at me, his expression serious, the earlier charm and nervousness replaced by a quiet intensity. "Luna," he began, then hesitated. "What you said in there, to Abernathy, about me, about passion and loyalty, and seeing the world differently. Did you mean any of it?" The question caught me off guard. I had been acting, hadn't I? Choosing words that would sound convincing, that would paint him in the best possible light for the lawyer. But as I replayed my own words in my mind, I realized that perhaps in the crucible of that moment, trying to find something true to say, I had stumbled upon a sliver of honesty. There were aspects of David, hidden beneath the usual bluster, that did hint at those qualities. His passion, though often misdirected, was undeniable. And his desperate act of coming to me, of trusting me, did suggest a strange kind of loyalty, a belief in something good. I said slowly, "I think there's a part of you, David, that is all those things. Or could be. You just need to let that part win." He held my gaze for a long moment, and then he nodded, a small, almost imperceptible movement. "Thank you, Luna, for everything. Not just for tonight, but for seeing that, or hoping to see it." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a plain white envelope. Not the thick one with the money, but a smaller, thinner one. He handed it to me. "What's this?" I asked, confused. "It's a letter," he said. "For you, and for Mark. Something I wrote, in case tonight didn't go well. Or even if it did. Things I needed to say." He paused. "Don't open it now. Maybe read it tomorrow." I took the envelope, a strange premonition prickling at the back of my neck. "David." "I should go," he said, his voice suddenly tired. "Thank you again, Luna. You've given me a chance. I hope I don't waste it." He didn't try to touch me, didn't offer any further pleasantries. He just gave me a small, sad smile, then put the car in gear. I watched him drive away, the red taillights disappearing into the darkness, feeling an inexplicable sense of melancholy. Mark met me at the door, his face anxious. How did it go? I leaned against him, suddenly exhausted. I think it went okay. Abernathy seemed convinced. I told him about the dinner, the questions, the answers, David's surprisingly adept performance. I told him about my own moment of near panic and the words I'd found to describe his brother. Mark listened patiently, holding me close. "You did it, Luna. I knew you could." He looked down at the small envelope in my hand. "What's that?" "It's from David," I said. "A letter. For both of us. He said to read it tomorrow." We went inside, and the house felt wonderfully normal, wonderfully safe. The weight of the evening, the charade, began to lift. But the small sealed envelope on the kitchen counter felt like an unanswered question, a piece of the story yet to unfold. The next morning, after a restless night's sleep, Mark and I sat at the kitchen table with our morning coffee. The sun was streaming through the window, a cheerful, ordinary morning that felt miles away from the drama of the previous night. The small white envelope lay between us. "Ready?" Mark asked, his eyes meeting mine. I nodded. He picked it up, slit it open carefully with a knife, and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. He began to read aloud. Dear Luna and Mark, David's familiar handwriting began. If you're reading this, it means that last night is over. Whatever the outcome with Mr. Abernathy, whether I get the inheritance or not, there are some things I need you to know. Mark paused, took a sip of coffee, and continued. First, to Luna. I can never thank you enough for what you did. You put yourself in an impossible position for me. You showed me a kindness and a courage that I don't deserve, and that I'll never forget. What you said that dinner about the man I could be, it struck me harder than you can imagine. For a long time, I haven't believed I could be that man. Maybe, just maybe, you've given me a reason to try. I felt a lump form in my throat. Mark glanced at me, his expression soft, before continuing. To Mark, my brother. I know I've been a disappointment to you more times than I can count. Reckless, irresponsible, always chasing some foolish dream and ending up in trouble. I've caused you so much worry, and I'm deeply sorry for that. More sorry than I can say. You've always been the steady one, the good one. I've envied you for that more than you know. I've envied your life, your stability, your marriage to Luna. A woman far too good for the likes of me, and honestly probably too good for you too, you lucky dog. Mark let out a small, surprised laugh at that last part, a sound that broke the tension a little. He read on. The truth is, the bad people I mentioned are real. I made some terrible decisions, got involved in something over my head, and I owe a debt I can't repay without this inheritance. It was a stupid, desperate gamble, and it put me in a very dangerous place. Last night with Abernathy was my only way out. Whether it worked or not, I don't know yet. But I realized something important last night, watching Luna, listening to her, and thinking about you, Mark. Family, it's not something I've ever really valued properly. I've always taken it for granted. I see now what a fool I've been. The $100,000 I offered Luna, it was a desperate, clumsy gesture. I know it was insulting, and I am so sorry for the crudeness of it. I didn't know how else to signal how much I needed help. Mark, that money, the original envelope, is still in your safe. If Abernathy rules in my favor, I want you to take it. Not as payment, but use it for something good. For yourselves, for your kids. Donate it to a cause you believe in. Consider it a very small down payment on the lifetime of trouble I've caused. If Abernathy doesn't rule in my favor, well, then it's just paper, and I'll have to face what's coming. My eyes were blurring with tears now. Mark's voice was a little thick as he read the final paragraph. Whatever happens, I needed to say this. I'm leaving town for a while. I need to sort myself out, figure out who I am and who I want to be. Maybe someday I can be the kind of brother you deserve, Mark, and the kind of man Luna so generously hinted I could be. Thank you both. From the bottom of my now rather humbled heart, David. We sat in silence for a long time after Mark finished reading. The letter was so much more than I had expected. It was a confession, an apology, a cry for help, and a glimmer of hope, all rolled into one. It was raw, honest, and profoundly moving. Wow, Mark said finally, his voice hushed. I don't know what to say. He really was in trouble. I whispered, the full weight of David's fear finally hitting me. Serious trouble. And he was trying to protect us in his own twisted way by not telling us the full extent of it. Mark mused, shaking his head. That idiot. But there was affection in his voice now, mixed with the exasperation. Later that day, Mr. Abernathy called David. David, in turn, called Mark. The news was good. The inheritance was his. Great-aunt Mildred's conditions had been met. Mr. Abernathy had been entirely convinced by our performance. David was safe, at least from his financial predators. When Mark told me, a huge wave of relief washed over me. We had done it. Our bizarre, risky charade had actually worked. David had his lifeline. The $100,000 remained in our safe. Mark and I talked about it for a long time. We didn't feel right keeping it. In the end, we decided to donate the entire sum to a charity that helped people get back on their feet after making bad choices, a cause that felt fitting, given David's situation. It felt like the right way to close that chapter. We didn't hear from David for many months after that. He kept his word and disappeared for a while, presumably to do the soul-searching he'd written about. Life in our quiet corner of the world returned to its normal rhythm. The memory of that intense week, the strange dinner, the raw emotion of David's letter, it all began to feel like a dream, a surreal interlude in our otherwise ordinary lives. But something had changed. For me, the experience had been a profound lesson in empathy, in the surprising depths one can find in people if you look beyond the surface. I had seen a side of David I never knew existed, a vulnerability and a yearning for redemption that touched me deeply. It made me realize that people are rarely just one thing. They are complex, contradictory, capable of both great folly and surprising grace. And my marriage to Mark, it had been tested, certainly, but it had emerged stronger. The absolute trust he had placed in me, his willingness to support me through such an unorthodox situation, had deepened my love and respect for him in ways I couldn't have imagined. We had faced something strange and challenging, and we had faced it together, with honesty and open communication. That, I realized, was the true bedrock of our life together. About a year later, David resurfaced. He called Mark first. He sounded different, Mark told me later. Quieter, more thoughtful. He had used the inheritance to clear his debts, and then he'd invested the rest wisely. He'd started a small business, something legitimate, something he was passionate about. He was, he said, trying to build a life he could be proud of. He asked if he could see us, if we'd be willing. We invited him for dinner. Not at Le Claremont, but at our home, around our familiar kitchen table. It was a little awkward at first, the ghosts of the past year hanging in the air. But as the evening wore on, as David talked about his new life, his struggles, his small victories, the awkwardness faded. He was still David, still with that spark in his eye, but it was tempered now with a newfound maturity, a quiet humility. He thanked us again, properly this time, for what we had done. There were no grand pronouncements, no dramatic gestures, just a simple, heartfelt gratitude that felt more genuine than any of his previous pronouncements. Towards the end of the evening, he looked at me, a gentle smile on his face. "You know, Luna," he said, "I still think about that dinner sometimes. What you said. It became a kind of compass for me." I smiled back. "I'm glad, David. I'm glad you found your way." And he had. It wasn't a perfect storybook transformation. Life isn't like that. But it was real. He was trying. He was growing. And in the end, that's all any of us can do. That night, after David had left, Mark and I sat on the sofa, the same sofa where David had made his desperate plea what felt like a lifetime ago. The house was quiet, peaceful. "You know," Mark said, taking my hand, "for a while there, I was worried. About him, about us, about everything." "Me too," I confessed. "But it all turned out. Unexpectedly," he mused. "That ridiculous offer, that crazy scheme, who would have thought it would lead to this? To him actually getting his life together. I leaned my head on his shoulder. "Sometimes," I said, "life has a strange way of working things out. Sometimes an unexpected offer, a moment of shared vulnerability, can change everything." And it had. It had changed David. It had changed me. It had shown us all the surprising, messy, complicated, and ultimately hopeful ways that human hearts can connect, can forgive, and can find their way to a little bit of grace, even in the most unbelievable circumstances. It just goes to show you never really know what someone is capable of, or what a single act of trust, however unconventional, can set in motion.